Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to the Bloomberg Daybreak Asia podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. Doug Krisner's off this week. U.S. futures climbed and Asian equity futures were mixed after President Trump warned he may impose a 100% tariff on chip imports.
We're going to be putting a very large tariff on chips and semiconductors. But the good news for companies like Apple is if you're building in the United States or have committed to build, without question committed to build in the United States, there will be no charge.
The comments came as Apple CEO Tim Cook unveiled a $100 billion U.S. investment plan alongside Trump at the Oval Office. Coming up, we'll get reaction from Emily Benson, head of strategy at Minerva Technology Futures. After months of trade talks and threats, U.S. reciprocal tariffs are set to take effect at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time. For more, we heard from William Reinsch, senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He spoke with Bloomberg's Haidi Stroud-Watts and Haslinda Amin.
He previously served as U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce for Export Administration during the Clinton administration. Good to have you with us. William, what's your take? We're seeing headlines still, dropping when it comes to those tariffs. It ain't over till the fat lady sings. Where are we with these tariffs?
Well, another day, another tariff. That seems to be what's happening here. And it's just one thing after another. There's so many unanswered questions that it's very hard to figure out what's going to happen, on the secondary tariffs on India. Why not China? How is it going to be enforced? Is it going to be on everything, or are there going to be exceptions? There tends to be sometimes a list of exceptions that gets rolled out later on. On the semiconductor tariffs that you were just talking about a few minutes ago, same thing. Are they going? They're not going to be applied to companies that are producing here or have promised to produce here. What does that mean? How long do they have to keep their word? Are the tariffs going to be on the chips or the products that contain the chips? And if it's the product that contains the chips, is it on the full value of the product or just the value of the chip? None of these questions are answered right now. In a week, we may have some answers. But it's really the same as the deals that are on screen right now. There's a lot of unanswered questions about those, too, and a lot of cases where the leaders of the other countries have interpreted what they agreed to somewhat differently than what our president has said. So there's just a host of things that have to be resolved. This is going to go on for a very long time.
What are the implications, William? You can only imagine. Modi must be thinking, how did a friend become a foe? And you have to also question if India's non-aligned policy might change at this point in time.
Well, yes, I think that's the very important question, whether these tariffs are coming at the expense of the broader U.S.-India relationship. Relations with India have improved a lot over the last 20 years, starting in the George W. Bush administration, mostly for geostrategic reasons, mostly, I think, as a counterweight to China. And these actions now may be sacrificing the goodwill and credibility that have been built up over a long period of time. Trump seems to be frustrated by his inability to close a negotiation with the Indian government. There were many predictions that there'd be a deal. There were many optimistic predictions about a good deal, meaning for both sides, and none of that has happened. And for those of us that watch trade negotiations, we weren't really surprised. India is a very difficult country to negotiate with. So I think the president is frustrated and is taking out his ire on the secondary sanctions issue. First with India, he implied today that China might follow. So because they actually buy more Russian oil than India does. So stay tuned for tomorrow or the next day, more tariffs.
The counterweight element to China is a really interesting one to me because we've seen some of these traditional security allies in the region, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, really having to scramble to get favourable trade terms. India obviously now on the out as well, whereas Beijing seems to be kind of coasting along with the can being kicked down the road on an extended truce. What do you make of that dynamic?
Well, it's puzzling. I mean, the irony of a lot of this is that is how badly we're treating our friends. You know, we have friends and allies in the region, Korea, Japan. We have friends there in Southeast Asia that are not the Philippines is an ally as well. And we're treating them really harshly in these things, in these agreements. And you'd think that if the overall policy is to maintain the U.S. presence, particularly its economic presence in the Asia-Pacific region, you want to have friends, and you want to have people that are going to side with you if conflicts come up. And right now, it seems that we're really tossing those people aside. It's very worrisome.
What do you make of the state of play when it comes to China? I mean, is it just sort of a good news story for now because it is such a strategically and competitively difficult relationship that it's kind of being put on the back burner, and you know, the fact that these extensions are probably likely to happen suggests that this is a way to kind of make it a good news story? Well,
it's fascinating to watch that one play out. The president seems to be of two minds about China. A lot of the people he appointed to the administration are real China hawks that perceive China as an existential threat and favor, you know, decoupling to the maximum extent possible. The president does not seem to be in that group, although he appointed all these people. He does seem to have the view that if he and Xi Jinping could just sit down together one-on-one, they could work a lot of these differences out. He tried that in his first term. It didn't work. He appears now to want to try again. I don't think it'll work any better in the second term than it did in the first. But you've seen him over the last 2 months pulling his punches with China. The nasty rhetoric about the leadership, which he's displayed with respect to other countries, has gone away. He's imposed and then removed some export controls. It's kind of a yo-yo policy. They're on, they're off. And he's, not done anything on the Russian oil issue with respect to them, at least so far. I think he wants to get the meeting and doesn't want to disrupt the relationship. He's also very aware, as I'm sure you reported on, that China is the one country that has used its leverage on us, namely with critical minerals and rare earths, and they haven't hesitated to block their export. That was a wake-up call, I think, to the administration that this is one of the rare cases where Trump does not hold all the cards, and I think that forces him to proceed more cautiously.
William, we know that Trump's tariffs face a legal battle at home. Does it even matter? I mean, we know that Trump has a way of pushing through everything anyways.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to watch. My guess is that whether he wins or loses, it'll be very difficult to get rid of the tariffs, at least in the short term. If he loses, and I think this will play out over the next 4 or 5 months, it's not on a really fast track, but it's going to be faster than the normal course of litigation in the United States. I think by the end of the year, you'll get a decision out of the Supreme Court. If he loses, he'll probably say that the agreements that he's already struck are the product of the negotiations and not the product of the law that he used, so that the court's judgment about the law doesn't affect the agreements that he's negotiated. Now, he'll be sued about that. So more lawsuits, more litigation. The courts so far have tended to say, let's keep the tariffs in place while we're sorting out all these legal issues. So I think even if he loses, they're going to stay in place. And if countries are looking to the litigation as a fail-safe for them, that ultimately it'll get them off the hook, I think they're going to be disappointed.
William Reinsch, Senior Advisor at CSIS. Really great to have your views.
Welcome back to the Daybreak Asia podcast. I'm Charlie Pelletin this week for Doug Krisner. President Trump says he will impose a 100% tariff on semiconductor imports, adding he will exempt companies moving production back to the U.S. The comments came as Apple CEO Tim Cook unveiled a $100 billion U.S. investment plan alongside Trump at the Oval Office. For more, we heard from Emily Benson, head of strategy at Minerva Technology Futures. She spoke with Bloomberg's Haidi Stroud-Watts and Haslinda Amin.
Emily, really great to have you with us. And so when we see an announcement like this, which obviously looks big and impressive from the headlines, we know that it takes it to a sort of a cumulative $600 billion intended spend by Apple in the US market. Are you impressed by it in terms of what practically, significantly it means and what it means for some of these contracts with existing partnerships?
Thank you for having me. It sounds exactly like the type of arrangement that the Trump administration has sought even since before it came in. While the 100% announcement today on semiconductor imports may seem high, the administration actually first telegraphed that idea at that rate as far back as January of this year in the Taiwan context. And I think this has been a very forward-leaning posture of the White House to try to induce companies to make exactly this sort of announcement. I would also add that this comes on the heels of a separate $500 million announcement by Apple in the MP materials context, where it is also agreeing to offtake critical minerals and rare earths at a superficial price floor. And so Apple is really doubling down on the US market in a way that very closely aligns with this new posture on economic security in the United States.
Does this put the pressure then, because, President Trump obviously says this is a great example of how his trade policy, his supply chain policy is working, right? How much pressure is there on other tech names? We know that there were talks with Jensen Huang today as well, to also be able to, show up in the way that the president of the White House wants to see.
So rewinding a couple of weeks, we heard from the president and also Commerce Secretary Lutnick in Scotland on the sidelines of the EU-US negotiations and ultimately deal announcement that semiconductor tariffs were inbound. They were going to be announced on a short time frame. And so the administration has been teasing out the idea that if you would like to make a deal, now is a good time. I'm very curious to see what transpires at the end of this week and over the weekend heading into next week, because it's easy to foresee a scenario in which a lot of the big players come to the White House with ideas for carve-outs. And here, I think the primary push by a lot of the companies involved would be to not have this take place immediately. And that's actually something that we see that's transpiring very differently, for example, in the India context, where tariffs will enter into force tomorrow. And so there will certainly be an all-hands-on-deck effort to figure out where there's a little bit of give and take, because this will ultimately have very significant price pressure, especially for hyperscalers and data center build-out.
Emily, it's all about bringing chip production back home. The thing is, the U.S. has offshored that production to Asia since the 1960s. It doesn't have the ability, the capacity to do it, and it takes years to build new chip fabs.
That's absolutely right, with one exception, which is sort of uncomfortable for people who don't really like the direction of travel right now with U.S. policy, is that TSMC's production facilities in Arizona are actually beating expectations. And so I do think the administration has been relatively clear-eyed about the timeline. That being said, they're willing to apply maximum pressure to the likes of TSMC in order to expedite what's already a very fast time frame. Again, I do think there will be carve-outs to extend the timeline of implementation. If you talk to a lot of industry analysts, I think the 4 to 5 to 6 year time frame is more amenable for the industry. We also have to remember that this will directly confront one of the administration's other hallmark policies. And this was announced 2 weeks ago in the AI Action Plan. And here the White House is saying very publicly that it wants to prioritize AI build-out, it wants to double down on U.S. infrastructure, and very interestingly, it also wants to package a lot of that AI tech stack into separate bundles that it can then export abroad. It, of course, will need affordable inputs at the baseline in order to be able to export these packages. I'm very interested to see what the ultimate price impact is on that particular corner of the administration's policy.
And Emily, some say it is about quantity, it's also about quality. And when it comes to both of them, Taiwan and South Korea unsurpassed. What do you make of perhaps the quality and quantity that can be expected from the U.S.?
Well, I'm glad you bring up our allies and partners like Taiwan and Korea, but also the European Union, because a couple of weeks ago, in the lead up to the expiration of the reciprocal tariff pause, the administration has entered into these arrangements where foreign partners seem to be under the assumption that they would only be subject to a 15% tariff rate. And that includes a lot of these sectoral products like semiconductors. So one question will actually be whether or not today's announcement induces further development onshore by those countries, or whether or not we'll have to explore further negotiations. I also will note that the United States actually does not import a lot of semiconductors directly. Most semiconductors actually enter the United States in finished goods. So these are items like iPhones or laptops. And so it'll be interesting to see how the administration starts to calculate the actual value and whether or not each finished item will be subject to that 100% tariff rate.
Emily, all of this as we hurtle towards midterms, right? And as someone who's worked within the Commerce Department and within sort of broader industrial and supply chain policy, how likely or easy would it be for some of these policies to be rolled back, particularly if you say that there are negotiated carve-outs that push the timeline out by half a decade or more?
Well, trade is not top of mind for a lot of voters. It typically comes in somewhere in the 8th to 9th place for priority voting issues. That being said, in today's Apple announcement, for example, they've entered into a bigger partnership with Corning Glass. Corning will increase its workforce related to this one deal by 50% in the state of Kentucky. So it's also possible that we do see sizable job gains in very targeted sectors. That's, of course, aside from possible job losses and others. But if we start to see some economic movement, I definitely could foresee it having some political consequences in the midterms.
Emily Benson, head of strategy at Minerva Technology Futures, speaking with Bloomberg's Haidi Stroud-Watts and Haslinda Amin here on the Bloomberg Daybreak Asia podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Bloomberg Daybreak Asia Edition podcast. Each weekday, we look at the stories shaping markets, finance, and geopolitics in the Asia Pacific. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, the Bloomberg Podcast YouTube channel, or anywhere else you listen. Join us again tomorrow for insight on the market moves from Hong Kong to Singapore and Australia. I'm Doug Krisner, and this is Bloomberg.